Well, thank you for having me today. I am Hassel Aviles, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm the executive director and co-founder of Not 9 to 5. I'm going to kick us off today. So that's Not 9 to 5. We're a nonprofit organization, and since we're speaking about workplace mental health and we're speaking about so many topics today, I wanted to kick us off and ground us a little bit. So I want to kick us off with a little bit of breath work. So that might sound a little strange for some of you, but to be honest, there's a lot of science behind breath work. Just stopping to take a breath can immediately help regulate your nervous system, can help ground you into the moment, and can help you connect with your body. So a lot of us are really excited to be here. There's a lot of nervous energy. I can speak for myself. There's a lot of anxious energy. Public speaking is something I love to do, but it always triggers my social anxiety. So you're gonna come with me on this breath work exercise. So there's a really good exercise I like to use. I use it as a really good hack to connect, and whenever you're feeling overwhelmed, stressed, and you just, all you need is like a minute, 2 minutes max. So it's the 4-7-8 breath. So you breathe in for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. I'm just gonna do it once with you, but I wanna give this as an offering and a gift to you to take away today. You can use it anytime, it's free. It's with you at all times, and it's also something I like to talk about because no one teaches us how to breathe, and oftentimes we end up breathing from our chest, especially when we're nervous or anxious or stressed. So today, I'm just gonna remind you that when you do this, try to breathe from your belly. So you're gonna wanna inhale, and you want your belly to almost like blow up like a balloon. It helps to put your hand on your stomach sometimes, just to remind yourself. If you're feeling this blow up, you need to go deeper. And then we're gonna hold, and then we're gonna exhale. Breathe in through your nose, breathe out through your mouth. So inhale for 4. Hold for 7. And exhale for 8. It's magic. Works every time. So, Not 9 to 5, nonprofit global leader in mental health advocacy for the hospitality and food service sector. Myself, I have lived with mental illness and substance use challenges since I was about 16 years old. The exact same time I entered the hospitality industry, not a coincidence. And there's a lot that happens in our industry that goes unspoken. If you work in restaurants, if you work in bars, a hotel, almost all food service and hospitality industries have neglected workplace mental health for centuries. So this is a really new conversation, and I like to start with the topic of labor shortage because it's such a hot topic these days, but also they're completely interconnected. So when you have a space of a workplace that fosters psychological safety and that invests in workplace mental health, you see a direct correlation with employee retention. And so in a time when the media is covering the Great Resignation, it's covering the staffing crisis, labor shortage, everyone's feeling it. If you're an employer and it's quite common to be struggling with this. And so pre-pandemic, the rate was around 75%. It has gone up since then, and also it depends where in the industry you work. So fast food tends to be higher, but in comparison with a healthy turnover rate, you can see there's a massive difference. And in hospitality, I think what we don't talk about enough is how much this costs your business directly. So you're losing money with this turnover rate, but it's never gonna show up as a line item on your budget. The way this shows up, is through the turnover and having to retrain, and every time you lose someone, and the recruiting, and the productivity loss, and the impact it has on the morale of the whole business, right? On the workplace culture. So this research that was done by Cornell, it's about average $6,000 per person per year. So if you're losing 75% on average, if you have 50 people that work for you, by the end of the year, 38 of them are gone. And then when you multiply 38 times close to $6,000, we're talking over $200,000 a year. So this isn't just a little tiny loss. This is a massive loss, and we all feel it in different ways. The way this relates to workplace mental health is that pre-pandemic, there was already an epidemic of mental health and substance use challenges. So there was already a crisis rate happening pre-pandemic. And when we did research, we had hundreds of people all over North America fill out our surveys. In the beginning, it's not some of us that are having a hard time. Over 90% said yes to experiencing mental health or substance use challenges. It's most of us, it's not some of us. And the reason for that is because all of us have mental health, right? Just like you have physical health, you have mental health. Your brain is in your body. So it's all interconnected. And specifically in the pandemic, we started asking about the primary concerns. So the main pain points, do you experience symptoms of anxiety? 83% said yes. Do you experience symptoms of burnout? 86% said yes. Do you experience symptoms of depression? 76% of folks said yes. So again, not some of us, most of us. The difference that, I guess is happening a little bit more these days is that we're talking about it more. So in 2021, this last data point, over 2/3 of people, though, are still keeping their struggles to themselves and are trying not to let it show. And that's during the pandemic. So, you can imagine how much higher that number was pre-pandemic. And let's dig into that a little bit more. So specifically, do you speak openly about your mental health or your substance use at work? Most of us don't, unfortunately, and if we do, most of us only speak about it with our very close colleagues. And, this isn't, just to clarify, this isn't about getting into the little details of what you're specifically dealing with or diagnosed with. That's not what we're talking about here. It's even just the open acknowledgement of struggle, or the open acknowledgement of what you're, faced with. It's not about going into the real specifics. Obviously, we don't want that in the workplace, all the time, for many reasons. For some people, it's personal. For other people, it can complicate things. So just to really clarify that point, it's about the open acknowledgement, and it's also about the normalization, which, so much research has shown is what will help folks seek and accept help, right? Because the higher the stigma, the less of a chance that you're gonna reach out and seek help when needed. And it also goes towards prevention. And we wanted to really get a specific also on why not? What is keeping you from openly speaking? And if you're a leader, you're an employer, you run a business, you have the most influence than anyone else. But everyone, regardless of what your role is still feeling the impact of shame and stigma. So the shame and stigma in this industry is much higher than other industries, and there's a variety of reasons as to why. But as you can see, more than half of the group is still afraid of being judged, is still afraid of how they're going to be perceived, is still afraid, that most people won't understand. So the other thing I want to highlight too is that as a CEO, as an owner-operator, as a leader, we tend to have a disparity of perception on this topic. So we tend to think, so if I own the business, I run a nonprofit, so with my team, for example, I might go out into the world and tell you, no, we're so accepting of mental health. We invest in workplace mental health. We offer an employee assistance program. But what is really important to think about is not necessarily what those at the top are saying, but really what the rest of the team is saying. And the research has shown us that only half of the group agrees with the statement that there is open acceptance. So we tend to think we're more accepting than we are, which makes sense, obviously, but it's really important to openly acknowledge that. So just to be aware as a leader, as an employer, that you really need to check in with your team to make sure that they feel they're being supported, that they feel they have the resources that they need, that they feel that there's not a high rate of stigma and shame. And the way to do that, and the missing ingredient in our industry, is psychological safety. For most of us, we didn't grow up with this term. This isn't something we talked about all the time. If you're a chef, you're a bartender, you're not necessarily covering what psychological safety is, unfortunately. Our industry for so long has been influenced by the brigade system, particularly in kitchens. And the brigade system, for anyone that may not know, even if you don't know what it is, you've definitely felt the influence of it. But basically, it's the influence that came from the military. And it started in the late 19th century as cuisine de brigade and by Escoffier. And the idea is that there's a chain of command, and those at the top dictate what happens, and that there is not input coming back up. It's one-way street down. Unfortunately, that kills psychological safety. For there to be a psychologically safe workplace, you need to have input going up and down. You need to have the ability to make mistakes, to be vulnerable with one another, to take risks, to give and receive feedback. And the key to this, though, is, do you feel safe doing all of those things without any fear of negative consequences to how you're going to be perceived or to your job itself? A specific example of this, I can tell you from personal experience. When I was a server for many years in restaurants, I once told my manager that I needed a workplace accommodation. I wanted to change my schedule so that I could go to certain appointments, which was part of my treatment at the time. And I was shown a pile of resumes and told that I could be replaced tomorrow. So there was obviously not a very psychologically safe workplace there. And what it really showed me was that, there was a fear of being fired. I had a real fear of being fired. And it wasn't just me, obviously. Throughout the years, I've worked at many places. I even owned a restaurant at one point and ran an event business. I've worked in this industry in many different facets, and I saw it everywhere. I saw the shame and stigma everywhere. I saw the lack of psychological safety everywhere. And so I always like to talk about psychological safety because A, it's a very new topic in our industry, but B, I think there's like a misunderstanding of what that means. And really, it's quite simple. It is unnatural for us because so often in this industry, we're striving for perfection, So how does that work with making mistakes? Well, you have to start to see mistakes as an opportunity of learning versus an opportunity to penalize, right? That's the difference between like the brigade system approach and psychological safety. And more specifically, what I was saying earlier about the input going back up and down, there needs to be that feedback loop. There needs to be a culture of feedback so that wherever I fall on the hierarchy, that I can tell you, hey, this system we're using here, this process that we're using, it's not really working for me for these specific reasons, but I have an idea of maybe how we could tweak it. And me not feeling like I'm gonna get fired for that, or me not feeling like I'm gonna get, told whatever other negative response. And listen, as a leader, as an employer, you don't obviously have to do every single thing that your team wants you to do, but you do have to listen. And you do have to take it in and try to understand it from their perspective so that you can make an informed decision that is going to help everybody, not just yourself, right? Because as an owner, as an employer, as a leader, you have your perspective, but it's really important to make sure you have everyone's perspective. So Not 9 to 5 created a number of tools to try to help business owners and leaders and managers learn how to foster psychological safety. And the big one here that I want to highlight is role modeling, because as I said earlier, you have the most influence. You set the tone for your business. Everyone is going to follow, the lead on that. And so if you're nurturing psychological safety in bars and restaurants, in kitchens, et cetera, it's gonna become more normalized, and it's gonna be something that has a trickle-down effect. And we've seen this, by the way, we've seen this in so many other industries. Google did a project a number of years ago where they spent so much money and so much time with hundreds of teams and employers and managers, psychologists, et cetera. They obviously have all of the funds to kind of create these kinds of projects and research projects, and they were on a mission to try to figure out, how do you create the most high-performing team? How do you create the quote-unquote perfect team? The most, powerful team that you can have, the most effective team possible. And through all of their research and studies, and through everything that they analyzed, it turned out that the most important factor for high-performing teams is psychological safety. That everyone feels that they can show up as their authentic self, as I said earlier, be vulnerable, give and receive feedback, make mistakes. So role modeling this, bringing this term into your business, into your day-to-day, learning more about it, Google it, finding all the ways in which you can tweak this for your business, because obviously every business is different, has an enormous, enormous impact. And specifically this is another tool we built on active listening. Specifically, one way that you can also practice this on a daily basis is by learning more about active listening. So oftentimes, right now you're listening to me, or most of you are hopefully, you're thinking things in your mind while I'm talking, right? You're thinking of maybe things that you've experienced or what's going on in your life or something you'd like to say in response to me. The more that you can listen to understand, the more that you're practicing active listening. Most of us listen to respond. So trying to figure out, how can I listen to understand what this person is saying, regardless of how I feel about it, right? Because oftentimes your team is gonna say things to you and you're gonna think all kinds of opinions about what they're sharing, and that's natural and human. But you still wanna focus on the listening aspect, to understand where they're coming from, understand why they're saying what they're saying, understanding what's happening to them. So in addition to all of this helping employee retention, and in addition to all of this being something that helps obviously create psychological safety, I want to really emphasize today that the importance of investing in workplace mental health actually has a business case behind it. So in a time when we're talking about bringing this industry into the new, post-pandemic generation, trying to make sure we're scaling hospitality, make sure we're growing this, the sector as much as possible, investing in workplace mental health is a way that you can get there faster and stay there longer. There's amazing benefits to investing in workplace mental health. And when I say investing, yes, that means money, but it also means time and effort. because so many of us just want to throw money at a problem. It's a natural human thing to want to do. You offer benefits, you offer an EAP, Employee Assistance Program, but unfortunately, there's more to it than that. As I was mentioning earlier, with practicing active listening, with learning about psychological safety and learning how to practice a lot of these things. Another incredible benefit is that it fosters creativity, innovation, inclusion, and diversity of thought. So oftentimes we talk about DEI, and we hear a lot about DEI, but it's just as important to talk about the diversity of thought as well. And there's no way for you to capture that diversity of thought that's in your workplace now, that's on your team today. There's no way for you to capture that if you're not practicing a culture of checking in, if you're not practicing active listening, if you're not fostering psychological safety so that your team feels comfortable and safe to share what they're experiencing with you. And the great news is that this all has an ROI. So there is a return on investment. This has been studied in many other industries as well as our own, and it can fluctuate, but the summary is that the more you spend and the longer you spend it for, the higher the return. Oops, sorry. So one way to do this is through workplace mental health training. So not 9 to 5, we developed a certification program, and we wanted to create something that anyone could do. So because we're in an industry that has neglected this topic for so long, all of us are on different points of the learning journey, right? Some of us, before today, some of us already knew what psychological safety was. Before today, some of us didn't. And so if you're an owner-operator, if you're entry level, if you're a culinary student, hospitality student, if you just started to work in this industry last year, last month, last week, all of us are at different stages with understanding this topic. And so we wanted to find a way, how can we train people and certify them in the same way we do, for example, with alcohol, right? There's alcohol certifications so that you can work with alcohol, serve alcohol. It's the same concept. We wanted to certify folks in understanding mental health specific to our industry. So based on the research I was sharing earlier, the main pain points in our industry are those 5 that you see on the screen right now. And so the whole course is built on those 5 pain points. Those are the ones that we cover because those are the ones that kept coming up. It doesn't matter who we asked, right? If we asked culinary students, if we asked industry leaders, CEOs, owner-operators, managers, regardless, these were the 5 that kept coming up over and over again. And so we wanted to make sure that this was also not clinical and not academic and not too expensive, because I've taken trainings before, like, for example, mental health first aid, and it took me 2 days out of a week, like 2 full work days, plus it cost me over $200. So, and it was very clinical. So I walked away from that experience thinking, that's not gonna work for our industry. There's no way if a server, or a bartender or a cook can take off 2 full days and pay this amount. It doesn't make sense, it's not sustainable. So we wanted to create something, it's $45, and that's Canadian, so even less for you. But we've now launched this all over North America, and we have many businesses going through it. As I said earlier, this is very new to our industry, so it's going to take a while for that momentum to go. But regardless of whether you take our Connected certification or another, there's so much to be said for the training of this, for like getting your team educated so that they can speak about these things from a place of knowledge and from a place of lived experience. Because all of us have lived experience with mental health. As I said earlier, we all have mental health. And that lived experience is valuable. And it will help you connect to your team in so many different ways than you can imagine. And in this certification that I was mentioning, that's where you can also get all those tools that I was sharing earlier. You download them as a PDF, and you can keep them forever. So I really want to I really want to end on why also. Why am I talking about this I'm showing you the data, I'm showing you the research, I'm telling you that it's going to benefit your business financially. I'm covering, topics that are very current, like the labor shortage and the Great Resignation, and all of that is great. But the why is really important to think about. The reason why, the biggest reason why this isn't a nice to do, or this isn't a, well, maybe, I'm not sure, is because at the end of the day, our industry is made up of people. The biggest asset in your business is your team. It's not your equipment, it's not your space, it's not your ingredients, it's your people. And human beings, as it turns out, we are emotional beings. So often, I think we think of ourselves as cognitive thinking beings. And I'm sure most of you know who Dr. Brene Brown is. But for anyone who doesn't, please Google her and watch her TEDx talks. She's done research and has, a data pool of thousands. But her research is really interesting, and the latest that she released, there's a book and a show on HBO Max. And one of the biggest takeaways, that she kept highlighting was that we're not thinking machines. We are emotional beings who, on occasion, think. And there's a big difference, right? Because so often we tell ourselves stories about how we can think our way out of things. We're just let me just think about it more. Let me just do more research. Let me just analyze this, But unfortunately, we get into analysis paralysis with that, and we don't actually get into the feeling of things. So, we were raised in an industry that for so often was telling us to check our emotions at the door. And, I was told that in a much ruder way, but you get my point. And that's actually impossible. So we can't ask the impossible of our team, right? We can't ask people to not be human. It's part of the human experience to feel emotions, to have feelings, and the more that you can learn how to navigate those emotions and those feelings and put language to those emotions and feelings, the more effective your team will be, the more effective your business will be, the more profitable and sustainable it will be as well. And so I just really like to highlight this point, because I think for so often we can get caught up in stories of telling ourselves that, well, that's not for us, or that's not a priority right now. But unfortunately, if your team is made of humans, it is. And this is kind of my last point before I close out. I said this quote a number of years ago, and I've been using it for years now because I feel like it really helps folks understand. It's so common to think about ethical treatment and sustainability when it comes to ingredients, when it comes to animals, when it comes to the environment. And, it's so normalized for us to hear these statements, sustainability, when it comes to those topics. But I am trying to bring the focus back. The work that Not 9 to 5 is doing is trying to bring the focus back to the ethical treatment and sustainability of humans, of the people that are cooking, growing, serving, everything we consume. And that includes you as business owners, obviously, as employers. It's not just your team. You're the most important person because you have the most influence. But I really want to highlight this because it is, at the end of the day, all we are and all we have. So that is my talk. Thank you so much for listening. I was told to leave time for Q&A, so this would be the time that if you had any questions or any inquiries or something you wanted to share on this topic, or any kind of thoughts or opinions, put your hand up, and Megan will come along with the mic.
Hopefully this works. Are there specific therapists who focus on the hospitality industry?
That's a really great question. The question was, if anyone didn't hear, are there specific therapists or companies that offer therapy that are industry specific? So I've never heard of one personally, but there are definitely groups that have therapists on their teams that are doing this work. So for example, in Chicago, I'm going to shout out one of my favorite people. In Chicago, there's an organization called Healthy Poor, and the owner-operator is Laura Louise Green. She is a former therapist. She's not practicing therapy specifically with clients, but all of her trainings and all of the work she does as an organizational consultant now is coming from that place of having been a therapist. The other thing I want to highlight on this question specifically is that we so often go to therapy as something that we need to do for our mental health, right? It's like the most common thing that you're usually directed to. I remember being told to seek help and given all these brochures for different therapists. And listen, therapy is absolutely a very helpful thing, but I do want to highlight that it's not for everyone, right? And when you're dealing with different mental health challenges like the ones I was highlighting earlier, there's so many different ways in which healing and recovery can look like, right? There's so many different forms of treatment, and therapy, for example, for myself, is one of like 24 things that I do to take care of myself. There's so many things that we think about when it comes to healing and recovery that aren't therapy. So I don't know of any specific to our industry. I think that would be really, really important. I know that oftentimes you can find therapists that have worked in the industry before, right? And that's great because then you have that lived experience and that like unspoken understanding. So I would say that'd probably be the easier way to find one. Is I don't know of a specific clinic, but I would say as you're interviewing therapists, if you are seeking therapy, to ask them. Because the thing is, our industry has employed so many people at the beginning of their career, right? 18 to like 25, it's so many of our first jobs. And so it probably wouldn't be that hard to find someone that has worked in food service or hospitality or the culinary industry that now happens to be a therapist.
I have a question. I'm over here.
Oh, hi.
Hi, my name is Christy.
Nice to meet you, Christy.
Thank you. I would like to talk about boundaries.
Yes, please.
Because what I find is that we do a lot to try to make sure that they know how much we care about their mental health. And then what happens when they use that to take advantage of the situation? Because at the end of the day, we are a service industry and you gotta go to work.
Yep.
So I just and I do a lot around like sharing my story and talk about the tools we do in pre-shift. We've been having speakers come in and do 10-minute sessions about breath work and drug addiction and all these other kind of things, and that's all good and well, but I just feel like because we're making this possible, then the conversation lends to, well, I need a mental health day. And it's like, okay, that's cool, but you can only get a mental health day so often because you're the busser and I need these tissues bust. So I'm just trying to figure out how, as an employee, we balance this thing out, because it's been interesting because this is
real
the
talk.
Pandemic. Yeah. That's what I'm here for. So, it's interesting because I'm a caterer that owns a restaurant, and so then there's a different mentality in the restaurant than the caterer.
Oh yeah.
Caterers are like, okay, well, I may be going through it, but I'm gonna be done it too, so I can just figure it out later on.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Thank you. I mean, round of applause for that question. Also, you brought up one of my favorite topics, of life, which is boundaries and boundary work. Our industry also not very popular for boundaries. We have a lot of unlearning and learning to do around boundaries. So thank you for bringing that up. I want to give you an analogy to respond to what you just shared. So when we cut ourselves at work, right, when we burn our hand, we have a severe injury in the workplace. If you're my manager, I'm sorry, I'm just going to point to this person in the front. If you're my manager, I don't expect you to stitch me up, right? I don't expect you to start getting into my burn wounds and diagnosing what kind of degree of burn it is. All that is expected, in terms of health and safety, is that you connect me to the support I need to get the help for the injury. We need to start to think about this topic in the same way. So with mental health, if I come to you and I'm oversharing or crossing boundaries or all of that, there needs to be a way for us to learn to become better equipped at assessing the risk, listening without judgment, offering reminders and reassurance. But we need to refer to professional support. We need to refer to the specific help that is needed for that situation, whatever they're experiencing. And then we need to encourage other forms of support as well. So that tool that I just ran through, ALONE, it's actually in our certification. The way that you build those boundaries is by still making it possible for someone to get to the help they need without you being the help, right? Because you're not the help. I'm not the help either. Someone else needs to be able to support people with whatever it is they're experiencing. And boundary work is also something that takes practice. It really does. It's so different to talk about these things than it is to practice them. A lot of us are really good at talking about these things and thinking about these things, or maybe even feeling some of these things, but we're not I find that it's not as common to openly talk about the practice of these things. So thank you for bringing up a specific example of how we can practice this stuff. And you're right, at the end of the day, it is a workplace. And you have to get back to work, right? A lot of us have to get back to work all the time. And so there just needs to be a space for us to talk about these things, address these things, put boundaries around these things, but still get people to the help that they need.
Hi. Oh.
Yeah.
Right. Hold on.
Yes.
I'm about to piggyback off of that. Hold on, Miss Ma'am. I'm about to piggyback off that. It's okay. I'm right with you, though.
There.
I'm right with you. I think I have more of a comment. Only this is just like my take of what I've been hearing. I think that the disconnect comes from is that there's a lack of understanding in a lot of things that happen in the SOPs and the procedures and our policies that a lot of our employees just don't understand and they won't understand. I think that, and me being someone that has come from the outside in, right? I didn't grow up in restaurants. I had a 9 to 5 before here. I controlled a department, right? I had that seat too, where I was the employee and I was like, they can do this better, but I didn't have that upper level insight, right? And that makes a disconnect. But it also, because we work in such a close-knit industry, we become like a family. We're starting to share, and owners and operators and leaders become a dump bucket, right? And so now we're taking on things that happen in your past traumas, things that happen in your family now, because we're so close. So it's kind of almost like the burden of everyone's mental health that works for us is now being put on us when we technically, a lot of us technically, have not transferred any of that trauma. And now we're here dealing with this mess of people that the world has created and their parents have created.
Yep.
And situations and circumstances have created. But that goes back to we can't be dump buckets. Like sitting and listening to, because we care so much, there has to be a fine line of how much we do take and how much we do listen, because it affects me in the end.
Of course.
Right? So now I'm leaving with all of this thinking that I'm not doing a good job because one person isn't understanding or two people aren't understanding. We'll be held hostage that way. So I think that there has to be some level of understanding that, yeah, like a mutual understanding. Because just like Christy referred to, is that we do share. A lot of us do share. I send out surveys. I'm constantly walking in and saying, how are you today? I see that you might not be a little bit okay today. Do you want to go outside and talk today? Let's go just go take a walk around the block and gather yourself. Because we do understand.
Yep.
But it has to be some type of fine line, because we're not seen as human beings. We're seen as machines and people who have a gang of money, and there's a disconnect even if, right, and I don't know about y'all, but I ain't made it like that yet. I'm still trying to get my coins together, okay? But so it's like for me, because I went all in and I was really there because I understand, and I looked at kitchens and was like, this is crazy. The way that you guys are talking to each other and all this just venom that is spewing out of your mouths, this is crazy. In the front of the house, get your attitudes together. Y'all think that you guys are God's gift to the damn world. Like, let's fix this. But at the same time, like, I'm being affected. And I think that support groups like this is what we do need, but at the same time, we can't give it all up to our employees where they're controlling us and now we become puppets and held hostage. And that's what the conversation, I think, honestly needs to be, because I don't know if I'm speaking for everybody else in here, but I care about my employees and our mental health, but I have to be mentally fit, because we're dealing with a whole bunch of other stuff that a lot of us are about to mentally crack. And we're still trying to hold on to everything else and everybody else.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I think that needed to come out. And and I think that was really important. And I really appreciate you sharing that. I'm getting all kinds of alarm bells about how I'm out of time. So I can't say much, unfortunately, other than I totally agree. I totally see you. I totally hear you. As a leader, I'm in the same position. And that's specifically why boundaries, going back, sorry, I'm pointing, boundary work. We need to build boundaries. Of course, you're not a dump bucket. And we need to build it. We need to teach people how to treat us, right? And as leaders, we need to learn how to set up those boundaries so that that isn't possible to do, right? We're, like I said earlier, we're not the help. We're just connecting people to the help. But I feel that a lot. So thank you for sharing that on behalf of everyone else. And thank you all for having me. I'm gonna give the mic back.